The ship shook violently as Daniel fought with the controls, his hands gripping the edges of the console while warning lights bathed the cabin in a harsh red glow outside. The viewport, the alien planet, loomed larger and larger, its surface covered in thick green clouds that swirled like boiling water. He had been on a routine survey mission, scanning the edge of an uncharted system, when a sudden burst of energy from the planet's atmosphere struck his shuttle. The systems failed one by one. The navigation display flickered, the stabilizers shut down, and the engines coughed before dying completely. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, except for the hollow thud of his heart pounding in his ears. Gravity took hold of the crippled shuttle, dragging it downward through the clouds. The heat of entry washed over the hull, making the metal groan. The cockpit became unbearably warm, and Daniel could smell something burning deep within the ship. Alarms screamed for attention, but there was nothing left to do except brace himself. He pulled the straps tighter across his chest, gritted his teeth, and prayed that the planet's surface was soft enough to let him live. Shuttle crashed with a sound like the sky itself tearing apart. Metal screamed as it bent and snapped, trees shattered under the impact, and Daniel was thrown forward, his helmet striking the console. The world became a blur of green and gold light before everything went dark. When he woke, it was night. The sky above him was a black dome broken by streaks of pale blue light from strange constellations he had never seen before. The air was heavy and warm, carrying the scent of wet earth and something faintly sweet. His shuttle lay in ruins behind him, twisted and broken like the carcass of some ancient beast. Sparks still danced from exposed wires, casting brief flashes across the thick forest surrounding him. The trees here were unlike any he had known, towering far higher than redwoods. Their bark glowed faintly in pulsing patterns like the rhythm of a heartbeat, in vines thick as his arm hung from their branches, swaying slowly, though there was no wind. Daniel pushed himself up, wincing as pain shot through his side. His left leg throbbed, and he felt the sticky warmth of blood beneath his flight suit. His emergency pack was nowhere to be seen. He had no food, no water, and no weapon, only the dim light of the shuttle wreckage to hold back the dark. Somewhere beyond the trees, a low clicking sound echoed, followed by the sharp crack of branches breaking. Something was moving closer, and it was not trying to hide. The sound repeated again and again, each time a little nearer. His breath quickened. He looked around desperately for anything he could use as a weapon. Spotting a length of metal pipe jutting from the wreckage, he yanked it free, the edges still hot from the crash. Noises stopped. Silence pressed in, heavy and tense. His eyes darted through the shifting shadows, and then it came. A massive creature burst from the darkness, tall as two men, with a body shaped like a predatory cat and skin like polished stone. Its eyes glowed pale green, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of serrated teeth. It moved with terrible speed, bounding forward in long leaps. Daniel swung the pipe in desperation, but the creature batted it aside with a swipe of its claw, sending him stumbling backward. He fell to the ground, pain lancing through his ribs. The beast loomed over him, its breath hot and foul, and he could see its muscles tense for the killing strike. His mind raced for some kind of plan, but his body refused to move. The moment stretched into eternity, and then, from the shadows they came. Figures tall and graceful darted between the trees, each one holding a long spear tipped with a shard that shimmered like crystal. They moved faster than Daniel's eyes could follow, their bodies painted in strange swirling patterns that caught the faint light of the forest. The beast roared as the first spear struck its side, another pierced its neck, and a third drove deep into its chest. The creature thrashed once, then collapsed with a final shudder. Daniel's vision blurred, his ears rang. The figures surrounded him, their faces partially hidden behind masks of woven leaves and bone, their eyes bright and unblinking. The tallest among them stepped forward and knelt beside him. She spoke in a language unlike anything he had heard before, soft and flowing, yet edged with authority. He tried to speak, to ask who they were, but his voice was little more than a whisper. His strength slipping away, one of them lifted him effortlessly cradling him as if he weighed nothing, and began moving swiftly through the forest. The trees passed overhead like silent giants, and the strange glow of the bark cast shifting patterns on their faces. He felt himself growing lighter, his thoughts drifting into haze, the pain in his leg and ribs dulling to nothing as the darkness took him again. Last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was a canopy of bioluminescent leaves above, and the faint glimmer of the alien woman's eyes watching him with something between curiosity and possession. Daniel woke to a soft warmth pressing against his skin and a faint light filtering through the walls around him. The air was thick with the smell of earth and something sharp and herbal. He opened his eyes slowly and found himself lying on a bed made from layers of woven leaves and thick fur. The walls of the room curved upward into a dome, all made from vines interlaced so tightly they looked as if they had grown that way. From the ceiling hung glowing strands of moss, casting a pale golden light that swayed gently in the still air. He pushed himself up with a groan, every movement sending a dull ache through his ribs and his leg. Though the sharpness of the pain was gone, he looked down and saw his wounds were wrapped in bandages made of soft plant fibers that seemed to cling to his skin without adhesive. Beneath the wrappings, a cool sensation pulsed steadily, as if whatever medicine they had used was alive. Sound of movement drew his gaze to the far side of the room, where a figure knelt beside a low table. She was tall, her shoulders strong, and her limbs long and lean. Her skin bore faint markings like lines of silver flowing from her neck down her arms, catching the light when she moved. Her hair was dark and braided with small pieces of bone and shell that rattled softly. She looked at him with eyes the color of molten copper, unblinking and unreadable, and spoke in that same strange, flowing language he had heard before. The words rose and fell like music, but carried a weight he could not. As Daniel tried to answer in the only way he could, raising a hand to his chest and speaking his name slowly and clearly, the woman tilted her head as if listening, then repeated the sound carefully. Not quite right, but close enough. He nodded. She gave a small smile before standing and stepping toward the entrance. A curtain of hanging vines parted, and two more women entered, both carrying bowls of steaming liquid. The smell hit him first, rich and earthy with a faint tang of something like citrus. They set the bowls beside him and gestured for him to eat. The food was unlike anything he knew, a thick stew of green and gold chunks, with strands of something like root vegetable floating in a dark broth. Daniel hesitated, but hunger overpowered caution. The first taste was strange, bitter at first, then sweet and warm, settling heavily in his stomach. He ate slowly, aware of their eyes on him. When he finished, they led him outside. The light was different here, soft and green, filtered through layers of immense leaves overhead. The settlement was built in the heart of the forest. Huts woven from the same living vines. As his room rose in a circle around a wide clearing in the center, a large fire burned low, releasing a fragrant smoke. Women moved between the huts, carrying baskets of fruit, strips of dried meat, and bundles of herbs. Children, no taller than his waist, chased each other, weaving between the adults with shrill laughter. Everywhere he looked, he saw the same elegance and strength. Their movements precise, their clothing made from fibers dyed in deep reds and blues, their bodies adorned with beads, shells, and feathers that swayed as they walked. They all bore the same silver markings, though each pattern was different, some curling in spirals, others in jagged lines. Daniel realized these markings might tell their stories, their rank, or even their family ties. Tall woman who had first spoken to him stepped into the clearing, and the others turned toward her. She raised her hand and spoke, her voice carrying across the space. Though Daniel understood nothing, he could feel the shift in the air, the attention on him sharp and almost heavy. She gestured to him, and the women's eyes followed the movement, their expressions unreadable, some curious, others wary, a few openly hostile. Daniel realized with a sinking feeling that he was not simply a guest here. The way they stood around him, the way their hands hovered near their weapons, told him that he was being watched. Not out of kindness, but because they feared what he might do. The leader, as he guessed, she must be approached again. She spoke slowly this time, pointing toward the forest beyond the clearing, then to him, then back to the ground where they stood. Her expression was firm. Daniel understood enough to know she was telling him he could not leave. He felt frustration rise in him, but he swallowed it, forcing himself to stay calm. The last thing he needed was to provoke them. Days passed in a rhythm he could not control. Each morning he was given food and water, and each afternoon someone checked his wounds. The medicine worked faster than anything he had seen before, and within a few days he could walk without pain, though wherever he went, 2 women followed close behind, watching him silently. He tried to speak with them, using gestures and simple words, pointing to objects and naming them. They seemed amused by his attempts, and slowly began to share their own words with him. He learned the word for water, for food, for fire, and even for forest. Though he could tell his pronunciation made them laugh. At night he would sit outside his hut, watching the sky through the gaps in the canopy. Strange stars glimmered overhead, and the air was filled with distant cries and the deep hum of unseen creatures. The forest seemed alive in a way Earth's wilderness never had. He began to notice the patterns in the sounds, the way the clicking of insects faded when a predator was near, the way the glowing moss dimmed when a storm approached. Despite the beauty, Daniel could not ignore the truth. He was trapped here. The leader had made it clear he could not leave, and the guards, though polite, never let him wander too far. He began to wonder why they kept him. Was it fear, curiosity, or something else entirely? One night, as he lay awake listening to the rain on the vine roof, he caught the faint sound of 2 voices outside his hut. Their tone was urgent, and though he could not understand the words, he recognized his own name. He closed his eyes, pretending to sleep, but inside his mind raced. Whatever their reason was for keeping him, it was important enough to watch him day and night, and somewhere deep in the shadows of that alien forest he felt the weight of unseen eyes watching him with a patience that chilled his blood. The rain had passed during the night, leaving the forest washed clean and heavy with the scent of wet earth and blossoms. Daniel stepped out of the hut in the early light, the ground soft beneath his bare feet, the air cool against his skin. The guards were already there, standing a few paces away, their faces unreadable, but their eyes following his every move. He had grown used to their silent company, though the feeling of being caged had not lessened. This settlement was already alive with movement. Women carried baskets of fruit from the trees, and strips of dried meat hung from racks near the fire, smoke curling lazily into the sky. Children played near the edge of the clearing, their laughter bright and quick against the deeper hum of the forest. Daniel had learned enough of their language to exchange simple greetings and a few polite words, but true conversation still eluded him, and each failed attempt reminded him of how far from home he was. As he ate his morning meal, a stew rich with the flavor of some wild root and spiced with leaves that left a faint tingle on his tongue, he noticed a group gathered near the largest hut. It was taller than the rest, its roof woven with red and black fibers that seemed to shimmer when they caught the light. The leader, Lyra, as he had come to call her in his own mind, stood at the center, speaking with a woman whose markings were more elaborate than any he had seen before. Silver lines curling across her skin like rivers. The woman's eyes shifted toward Daniel once their gazes met, and held for a long moment before she turned back to Lyra. Later that day, Lyra came to him. Her steps measured, her expression calm, but her eyes sharper than he had seen before. She spoke slowly, choosing words he might understand. She pointed toward the forest, then to herself, then to him, and made a gesture like 2 hands joining together. She spoke a word he had never heard before, then repeated it again. Watching him closely, Daniel shook his head. He did not understand, so she motioned for him to follow. They left the safety of the settlement, moving along a path barely visible between the trees. The forest closed around them, thick and alive, the glow from the bark shifting as clouds passed overhead. Strange shapes moved high in the branches, and once Daniel thought he saw a pair of pale eyes watching from the shadows, but when he looked again, they were gone. The air grew cooler as they descended into a wide hollow where a pool of still water reflected The light like a mirror. Lyra knelt beside the water and touched its surface, sending ripples across the reflection. Then she pointed to him again and spoke the same word as before. This time, her tone was softer, almost reverent. Daniel knelt beside her, trying to see what she meant. In the water, his reflection wavered and changed, not into his face, but into the image of a figure surrounded by the women of the tribe. Standing tall with a weapon in hand before him lay the body of a creature unlike any he had seen, its size enormous, its head crowned with jagged horns. Daniel felt a chill run through him. This was not just a pool, it was something they used to see visions, to tell stories, or perhaps to foresee the future. Lyra touched the water again, and the image faded, leaving only his own face staring back at him. She spoke slowly, as if telling him a truth. She believed with her whole being. He could not understand the words, but the meaning was beginning to form in his mind. They thought he was meant to protect them back. In the settlement, the truth began to take shape. Through fragments of overheard words and gestures, the tribe lived under threat from another people who roamed the forest, tall and heavily armored with weapons that spat burning light. The women here avoided direct conflict when they could, but the enemy's territory was growing, and soon their hiding places would not be enough. According to their stories, a being from the sky would come, one not born of their world, who would turn the tide and drive the enemy back. Daniel understood now why they would not let him leave. He was that figure in their eyes, the sky-born warrior sent by whatever gods they believed in to save them. He tried to explain with the few words he knew that he had no such power, that he was only a man who had crashed here by accident. But they listened with patient eyes that did not waver. They did not believe in accidents. They believed in signs. As the days passed, he began to see more of their way of life. They were hunters and gatherers, but also skilled in crafts that turned the bounty of the forest into tools, clothing, and medicines. Their spears were tipped with crystal grown deep beneath the roots of certain trees, crystals that could cut through almost anything. Their clothing was woven from fibers that came from a plant whose leaves shimmered like silk, but were tougher than leather. He saw how they trained. Even the children learned to move silently through the forest and to strike with precision he had never seen before. Daniel's respect for them grew, but so did his unease. The prophecy or belief that bound him to them was unshakable, and the weight of it pressed on him. At night, he thought of home, of the sky filled with the familiar constellations, of earth, of the taste of real coffee, and the hum of the city at dawn. But every time he thought of escape, he remembered the look in Lyra's eyes at the pool, the calm certainty that his arrival was not a mistake. One evening, as the sun slipped low and the forest began to glow with its strange bioluminescence, Daniel sat by the fire watching the sparks rise into the dark sky. The women spoke softly around him, their voices low, as if the night itself listened. Then he heard it again, his name, spoken in that urgent tone he had heard once before. Two of the women were speaking to Lyra, their faces tense. One pointed toward the forest, the other toward Daniel. Lyra's eyes narrowed, and she gave a short command. The women nodded and melted into the shadows, their movements swift and silent. Daniel felt the prickle of unease crawl up his spine. Something was coming. He did not know if it was the enemy from their stories or some other danger, but he knew without being told that whatever it was, the tribe believed it was connected to him, and that belief, whether true or not, would decide his fate in this alien forest. Air that night was thick with the scent of rain. Though the sky above the canopy was still clear, the forest felt restless, leaves shifting without wind, branches creaking softly, as if the trees themselves whispered to one another. Daniel sat inside his hut, listening to the faint rustle of movement. Beyond the clearing, he knew the guards were out there, though he could not see them, and he wondered if they were watching for something approaching or making sure he stayed where he was. Sleep refused to come. His thoughts turning again and again to the wreck of his shuttle, the twisted metal scattered among the trees somewhere beyond the settlement. He had seen some of it when they first brought him here. Parts of the hull, broken and bent, still gleamed under the strange light of the forest, and he knew that inside those pieces there might be the components He needed to repair his beacon. If he could send a signal to the nearest human relay, a rescue ship could come and take him home. The thought filled him with both hope and guilt. For days he had been quietly watching where the tribe stored the items. Taken from his ship, the crystals and tools they considered sacred relics, kept in a small shelter near Lyra's own hut. He had seen a power cell among them, and pieces of wiring. If he could get to those and reach the wreck, he might have a chance of building something to call for help. The plan was dangerous, but every day the forest seemed to press in closer, and the idea of remaining here forever was beginning to weigh on him like chains. The opportunity came sooner than he expected, not from his own making, but from the forest itself. A deep rumble rolled through the ground just before dawn, waking the settlement from its sleep. It was not thunder. The sound was too steady, too controlled. The women moved quickly, gathering weapons, their eyes scanning the trees. Daniel stepped outside to see Lyra speaking urgently to several of her warriors. They broke away and took positions around the clearing, their bodies tense, their movements sharp. Then he heard it, a low mechanical hum, unlike any sound the forest made. It was coming from beyond the trees, growing louder. The air itself seemed to vibrate with it, and Daniel felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Shapes emerged from the darkness, not animals but figures tall and broad, moving with the precision of soldiers. Their armor glinted in the glow of the forest, and in their hands they carried weapons that pulsed faintly with blue light. These had to be the rival people the tribe had spoken of. The attack began without warning. A flash of light seared through the clearing, striking one of the huts and sending sparks and smoke into the air. The women reacted instantly, spears flying through the air with deadly accuracy. One attacker fell with a crystal point lodged in the gap between his armor plates, but the others pressed forward, their weapons spitting bursts of energy that tore through vines and shattered the woven walls of the huts. Daniel dove behind a fallen log, the noise of the fight filling his ears, the sharp crack of the energy weapons, the deep thud of spears striking flesh, the cries of the wounded. He saw Lyra in the center of the chaos, moving like water through the fight, her spear flashing in the dim light, cutting down any who came too close. Yet even she was being pushed back as more armored figures poured into the clearing. He knew this was his chance in the chaos. No one was watching him. He could slip into the forest, reach the relic shelter, take what he needed, and be gone before they realized it. His heart pounded as he crawled along the edge of the fight, staying low. The shelter was only a few steps away. Now he could see the shape of the power cell glinting inside. But then he saw one of the armored attackers break past the warriors, heading straight for a group of children huddled near a hut, their small bodies frozen in fear. The attacker raised his weapon, the blue glow building at its tip. Daniel felt his muscles tense, his breath catch, and in that moment, the choice stood before him. Like two doors, one leading to freedom, and the other to a fight that was not his. He moved without thinking, leaping from his cover and swinging a length of broken hull plating. He had grabbed from the ground. The metal slammed into the attacker's arm, knocking the weapon aside before it fired. The soldier staggered, and Daniel drove forward, shoving him into the ground. The weapon clattered away, and one of the women finished the attacker with a swift strike of her spear. The children scattered to safety, their wide eyes never leaving Daniel. Something shifted. Then the nearest warriors looked at him differently, no longer as the outsider they were forced to guard, but as someone who had chosen to stand with them. The fight raged on around them, and Daniel felt the heat of adrenaline flooding through him. He grabbed the fallen attacker's weapon, testing its weight, and found it surprisingly light. With the weapon in hand, he moved to where Lyra was locked in combat, with two enemies firing quick bursts to force them back. Battle was fierce, and the clearing became a blur of movement, light, and sound. But slowly the tide began to turn. The attackers faltered under the combined force of the warriors' skill and Daniel's strange new weapon. Those who could still move began to retreat, disappearing back into the forest, leaving behind their dead and wounded. Silence returned in waves, broken only by the labored breathing of the survivors. Daniel stood in the clearing, chest heaving the weapon still in his hands. Lyra stepped toward him, her face streaked with dirt and blood, her eyes bright with a look he could not name. She spoke a word he recognized, the same word she had said at the pool, the one that meant protector, skyborn savior. The others gathered around them, and though none spoke, their faces told the same story. The prophecy had taken root in them more deeply than ever. The shelter, with his precious shuttle parts, was only a few steps away now, untouched during the fight, the beacon components waiting within. But as he looked at the women around him, their spears lowered, their bodies weary from the fight. He felt the weight of the decision pressing harder than before. Escape was still possible, but the forest had drawn him into its story, and leaving might not be as simple as walking away. The clearing was littered with the signs of battle, the ground churned where feet had struck the soil, spears and broken weapons lay scattered among fallen leaves. The faint glow of the forest bark flickered as if the trees themselves were catching their breath after the violent smoke drifted up from a hut that had taken the force of an enemy blast. The scent of burnt vines and scorched earth hung heavy in the air. Daniel stood among it, all his body aching, his hands still tight around the alien weapon he had taken in the fight. The women moved quietly, tending to the wounded, carrying the dead to the edge of the clearing where they laid them with care, their silver markings dim in the pale light. Lyra knelt beside one of the fallen, her hands pressed gently against the warrior's chest, her head bowed for a long moment. When she rose, her eyes met Daniel's, and for the first time since he had known her, there was no unreadable distance in them, only the weight of shared survival. He helped where he could, fetching water, tearing strips of fabric from damaged huts to bind wounds. Each time he passed the small shelter, holding his shuttle parts, his eyes lingered. The beacon components still sat there, untouched, their smooth metal surfaces catching the faint glow of the moss. He could almost see his hands assembling them, the soft rise of a signal into the sky, the image of a rescue ship cutting through the clouds and lowering to take him home. The thought filled him with a sharp ache he had been holding back for days. When the dead were laid to rest and the fire in the center of the clearing was lit, the tribe gathered in a circle, their shadows stretching long into the forest. Lyra stood before them, speaking in a voice that rose and fell like the rhythm of a tide. Daniel could not understand her words, but he could feel them, each pause and swell carrying meaning, in the way the women nodded or tightened their hands on their knees. At one point she turned and gestured toward him. The circle's eyes shifted to him, warm, steady, filled with something he could not name. Later, as the tribe settled into the quiet of night, Lyra approached him alone, her steps soft against the earth. She stopped in front of him, her expression calm but her gaze searching. She spoke slowly, using the words he had learned. She told him he had a choice now. The enemy had seen him fight, and they would return stronger next time. The tribe would stand, but with him, they believed they could win. She touched her chest, then pointed to him, meaning clear. She was asking him to stay, not as a prisoner, but as one of them. Daniel's heart pounded. The forest around them seemed to lean closer, listening. The path was open. He could take the parts from the shelter, slip away in the night, reach the wreck of his shuttle and send the signal. In a matter of hours, a rescue ship might come and lift him from this place, back to the life he knew. Yet as he looked around at the quiet huts, the glow of the moss in the trees, the sound of distant night creatures, he felt something shift inside him. He thought of the first night when the beast had stood over him, its teeth bared, and the tribe had stepped from the shadows to save him. He thought of the days spent learning their words, watching their skill in the hunt, and their care for one another. He thought of the children's wide eyes in the battle, the way they had looked to him, not with fear but with hope. He walked to the shelter, his steps slow, his hands closing around the smooth weight of the beacon parts. For a moment he held them, the metal cold against his skin. Then he set them down again in their place, turning away. He found Lyra watching him from the edge of the firelight. She did not speak, but the faint nod she gave told him she understood. At dawn the forest woke with a low hum, the light filtering through the leaves in pale green shafts. Daniel stood beside the women as they prepared for the day, weapons checked, supplies gathered, faces painted with silver for Whatever might come, he no longer stood at the edge of their circle, he stood within it. When Lyra handed him a spear, its crystal tip catching the morning light, he took it without hesitation, feeling its weight settle into his palm like something. It had always been meant to hold far above the canopy. The sky remained empty. No rescue ship cutting through the clouds, no voice calling his name over the come. Instead, there was only the deep living breath of the alien forest, the watchful glow of the towering trees, and the steady presence of those who had once been his captors and were now his people. Daniel had come to this place as a stranger fallen from the sky, with no ties to the land or its people, but here among the warriors of the forest he had found something he had not known. He was missing purpose, belonging, a reason to stand and fight. When the enemy returned, as they surely would, he would be ready, and this time he would not fight for escape, but for the home he had chosen. The end.